The world's largest PC manufacturer just made a decision that Microsoft cannot undo. Lenovo, the company that ships more laptops than anyone else on Earth, has certified its entire ThinkStation and ThinkPad P-series lineup to run Linux, not as a trial, not as a pilot, as an official, supported, production-ready alternative. The drivers are upstreamed to the Linux kernel. The firmware updates deliver without Windows. The certification is done. Meanwhile, Microsoft has set a date, October 14th, 2025. That is the day Windows 10 support ends, and according to Canalys, approximately 240 million computers, machines that work, machines that run perfectly well today, cannot meet Windows 11's hardware requirements, not because they're broken, because Microsoft wrote a spec sheet that excluded them. Read that again. 240 million functioning computers turned into forced e-waste by a policy decision. In this investigation, we are going to expose 3 things Microsoft never wanted in the same sentence: the hardware mandate that stranded 250 million devices, the surveillance architecture quietly built into Windows 11 while you weren't looking, and the coordinated OEM defection that is already underway and cannot be reversed. This is not a software story. This is a reckoning. Let's start with what Microsoft has been doing to the companies that build your computers. For 3 decades, the arrangement was simple. You bought a laptop, Windows was on it. The hardware ran it. Nobody asked questions because nobody needed to. That arrangement ended the moment Microsoft published the Windows 11 system requirements. Windows 11 requires a TPM 2.0 chip as a mandatory hardware component. It requires an 8th generation Intel processor or newer, or AMD Zen 2 architecture or newer. It requires 8 gigabytes of RAM as a practical minimum, and it requires 64 gigabytes of storage. If your machine was built before roughly 2018, there is a meaningful chance that Windows 11 will not install on it, not because the hardware cannot run the software, but because Microsoft says it cannot. Here is what Microsoft did not say publicly. Their own compatibility testing confirmed that many of the excluded processors perform adequately on Windows 11. The Intel 7th generation core chips on the blocked list, chips that were selling in premium business laptops in 2016 and 2017, run Windows 11 at 11 without incident on machines where users have bypassed the check. The block is a policy decision. Microsoft published a list. If your processor is on it, you are done. The TPM 2.0 chip adds between $2 and $8 to manufacturing cost, depending on whether it is a discrete module or a firmware implementation. The RAM floor adds approximately $12 to $15 per unit at the 8 gigabyte minimum. Microsoft wrote those requirements. Hardware manufacturers absorbed those costs, and every consumer who bought a laptop in 2016 or 2017 is now holding a machine that Microsoft officially considers beneath the standard, not because it stopped working, but because the rules changed after they paid for it. Canalys estimated in 2023 that approximately 240 million PCs would be stranded by this requirement before Windows 10's end of support date. 240 million machines, landfill, or Linux. The hardware refresh cycle is not a side effect of Windows 11's requirements. It is the output. When your existing machine cannot run the new operating system, you buy a new machine. That machine comes with a new Windows license. Microsoft does not need to sell you the software. They just need to create the conditions where you have no choice but to buy hardware that comes with it. They wrote the spec sheet. You pay the bill. But the hardware mandate is only the first layer. The second layer is what Microsoft built inside the operating system once you had no choice but to upgrade. In May 2024, Microsoft announced Windows Recall. They called it a breakthrough in personal computing. An AI-powered memory for your computer, they said, and it takes screenshots continuously and automatically in the background of everything on your screen: your browser, your documents, your banking portal, your private messages. Every pixel that appears on your display gets captured, stored, and made searchable through an AI interface. Microsoft planned to ship it, enabled by default, on every Copilot Plus PC. Kevin Beaumont, a security researcher with decades of experience in enterprise threat analysis, examined the implementation and found that Recall stored all of this screenshot data in an unencrypted SQLite database, not behind a password, not protected by elevated system permissions, accessible to any application and running with standard user-level access on the machine. Any malware that reached your device could read every screenshot Recall had ever taken. Your bank login screen, your medical records, your private correspondence, all of it sitting in an unencrypted file. This is not a theory. The United Kingdom's Information Commissioner's Office opened a formal investigation. Microsoft paused the Recall rollout. They changed it from default on to opt-in. They announced encryption improvements. What they did not do is explain why it shipped the way it did in the first place. Building a system that takes continuous screenshots of everything you do on your computer is not a minor engineering decision. It requires months of design work, testing, and deliberate architectural choices. The decision to store that data unencrypted was also a choice. The decision to enable it by default was a choice. Microsoft made every one of those choices, and then retreated only when a regulator asked questions. Recall is not the only component of this architecture. Windows 11 Home requires a Microsoft account to complete the initial setup. Microsoft has, over the course of multiple updates, removed the workarounds that allowed users to create local accounts instead. Setting up your new computer is now, by design, a data registration event. Your account, your device, your usage patterns, all associated, all synchronized, all contributing to a profile that Microsoft's services can use. You are not buying software. You are enrolling in a data collection program that happens to include a word processor. The hardware manufacturers noticed, and the ones who had already run the numbers on what Windows actually costs them had a decision to make. Lenovo does not make decisions quietly. When the world's largest PC manufacturer changes its operating system strategy, it files certification paperwork, upstreams driver code to public repositories, and commits to a firmware update infrastructure that will keep those machines running for the life of the hardware. That is what Lenovo has done. The ThinkStation desktop line, the ThinkPad P-Series workstations, certified for Ubuntu 22.04 LTS, certified for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, not as a consumer experiment, as the professional, supported configuration for the machines that architects, engineers, scientists, and financial analysts use to do their work. The certification is not a sticker on the box. Lenovo upstreamed device drivers directly to the Linux kernel. That means the driver code lives in the open source kernel itself, maintained by Lenovo's engineers, distributed in every Linux release, functional across Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, and every distribution that ships a standard kernel. This is not a proprietary driver package that stops working when Lenovo stops supporting it. This is a structural commitment to Linux compatibility that exists independently of any business relationship with Microsoft. Lenovo also committed to delivering firmware updates through the Linux Vendor Firmware Service, the vendor-neutral infrastructure that allows Linux systems to receive BIOS and firmware updates without booting Windows first. A machine whose firmware Lenovo will only update through Windows is a machine that stays dependent on Windows. Lenovo removed that dependency. Firmware updates now work without Windows. Their own words from the official certification announcement: by certifying their entire ThinkStation and ThinkPad P-Series portfolio, they are prioritizing the needs of specialized end users and helping to ensure the best possible out-of-the-box Linux experience. Not exploring, not piloting, prioritizing. Ubuntu preloaded. ThinkPad models are available on Lenovo's direct website today. The certification is complete. The driver code is in the kernel. None of this unhappens. Microsoft cannot write a check that removes code from the Linux kernel. The defection from Windows as default is structural, documented, and permanent. Lenovo did not invent this strategy. They joined a program that Dell started building 12 years ago, Project Sputnik. Dell launched it in 2012. Ubuntu Linux on Dell XPS hardware, officially certified, officially supported, with Dell's own technical support infrastructure behind it. Not a community project. Not an unsupported configuration. Dell's name on the box, Dell's engineers on the phone, Dell's firmware team delivering updates. Today, Dell certifies Ubuntu on its entire XPS Developer Edition line, multiple Precision workstation configurations, and select Latitude Business laptop models. These machines ship with Ubuntu preloaded and are listed on Dell's website alongside Windows configurations of identical hardware. Here is the number Dell did not need to explain, but that explains everything. Ubuntu configured XPS and Precision machines consistently price $80 to $150 lower than equivalent Windows configurations. Same processor, same memory, same display, different operating system. The price difference is not Dell being generous. The price difference is the Windows license removed. Dell has been selling you that proof for 12 years. The Windows license has a cost. Dell knows what it is because they pay it. The Ubuntu configuration shows you what the machine costs without it. The regulatory institutions that oversee Microsoft's market behavior have noticed, and in Europe, they stopped waiting for the market to fix itself. For 20 years, Microsoft argued that bundling Edge, Bing, and OneDrive into Windows was product integration, not anti-competitive behavior. For 20 years, that argument worked. In September 2023, the European Commission formally designated Microsoft as a Digital Markets Act gatekeeper, the legal classification that triggers the DMA behavioral requirements. Under those requirements, Microsoft must allow users to uninstall default applications, must provide interoperability with competing services, and must not use its gatekeeper position to preference its own products. In 2024, Microsoft made Edge removable in the European Union. A browser, Microsoft spent a decade fighting to protect as a default. In Europe, you can now uninstall it, not because Microsoft changed its principles, because the alternative is a fine of up to 10% of global annual revenue for non-compliance, rising to 20% for repeat violations. Microsoft's FY 2024 revenue exceeded $245 billion. 10% is $24.5 billion. The European Commission's investigation into Microsoft's DMA compliance on interoperability requirements is ongoing. The regulatory pressure does not stop at Edge. Microsoft's bundling strategy, the mechanism that kept users on Microsoft services, on Microsoft browsers, on Microsoft accounts, on Microsoft hardware, is now subject to active regulatory dismantling in the world's largest trading bloc. The business model is being challenged simultaneously by OEM partners running the Linux math, by security researchers documenting the surveillance architecture, and by regulators with the legal authority to impose 9-figure penalties. Microsoft is not losing on one front, it is losing on all of them, and the window for reversing any of it is closing. So what does this mean for you? Here's what the smart money is already doing. Ubuntu, the distribution, Lenovo officially certifies and Dell has shipped for 12 years, is the starting point. If Ubuntu feels unfamiliar, Linux Mint was built specifically to feel like Windows to people making the switch. Zorin OS was designed for exactly the moment you are in right now. All three are free. All three run on hardware you already own. For hardware, buy certified. Lenovo's ThinkPad line carries official Ubuntu and Red Hat certification, with drivers in the Linux kernel and firmware through LVFS. Dell's XPS Developer Edition ships with Ubuntu preloaded and costs less than the Windows version of the same machine. Framework's modular laptops are designed from the ground up for Linux, and every component is user replaceable. No planned obsolescence, no forced refresh cycle. Before you commit to anything, run Linux from a USB drive. No installation required. Your Windows installation stays exactly as it is. You boot from the USB, use Ubuntu for an hour, and decide from experience rather than marketing. This is not an accident. 240 million devices do not get stranded by coincidence. Recall does not ship enabled by default because Microsoft forgot the off switch. The hardware mandate, the account requirement, the surveillance architecture. These are design decisions. Every one of them was chosen. Lenovo ran the numbers. Dell ran the numbers for 12 years. Now you have the numbers. Stop letting them own your computer.